am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso. Today is the first day of February in the year 2026. I speak to you not as a man standing on a podium, but as a man sitting alone with the weight of a nation pressing on his chest. In recent weeks, I have been deeply tired, not the kind of tiredness that sleep can fix, but the exhaustion that comes from carrying decisions that shape life, death, dignity, and future. Burkina Faso has walked through fire. Our land has known fear, division, grief, and silence where laughter once lived. Every day, people look to me for answers, for strength, for certainty. And yet, leaders are human before they are symbols. There comes the moment when reason itself grows quiet, when calculation no longer brings clarity. That moment came to me not in strength, but in weakness. After long nights without rest, after meetings that ended without resolution, after prayers that felt like words falling into dust, my body gave way. My mind entered that narrow space between waking and sleep, where defenses drop and truth is no longer filtered by pride. It was there that I encountered Jesus. He did not arrive with thunder or spectacle. He did not accuse me. He did not frighten me. His presence brought a stillness so complete that every anxiety fell silent at once. I understood without being told that there exists an authority higher than all political power, higher than any office, higher than any uniform. And he revealed something simple. Not a new law, not a command to conquer, not a strategy to defeat enemies. He asked for a gesture. He asked that before every meeting that decides the fate of our nation, I begin by making the sign of the cross. At first I was surprised. In a world burning with complexity, how could such a small act matter? Yet in that presence I understood that this was not about religion alone. It was about humility. It was about remembering that leadership is not ownership, but stewardship. What I share with you now is not propaganda. It is not an instruction forced upon anyone. It is a testimony, a story of what happens when power remembers its limits. I speak to Muslims and Christians, to leaders of the Sahel, to elders across the world, and to every soul who still believes that moral grounding matters more than domination. This is not the end of the story. It is the opening of a door. If you are willing, walk with me. When I say that I met Jesus, I must be careful with my words, not because the moment was unclear, but because language is often too small to carry such weight. What I experienced did not belong to imagination, nor did it resemble a dream shaped by desire or fear. It was presence, pure presence. He did not appear as a king seated on a throne, nor as a warrior clothed in fire. There was no crown, no weapon, no banner. He stood within a quiet light that did not blind the eyes, yet made everything else feel dim by comparison. The light did not come from a direction, it simply was. The first thing I noticed was the absence of fear. In leadership, fear is constant. Fear of failure, fear of betrayal, fear of making the wrong decision at the wrong time. In that presence, fear had nowhere to stand. It dissolved without resistance like mist under the morning sun. I did not feel judged. I did not feel examined. I felt known. There is a difference. To be judged is to be measured against rules. To be known is to be seen entirely, without the need for defense. In that knowing, I understood that my titles, my rank, my power, my uniform meant nothing there. And strangely, this realization did not diminish me, it relieved me. He did not speak immediately. Yet communication was already happening, not through sentences, but through understanding placed directly into the heart. I knew that this presence carried authority greater than any constitution or command. Not authority enforced by force, but authority rooted in truth. In that moment, I realized something unsettling and freeing at the same time. Political power is loud. Moral authority is quiet. Political power demands attention. Moral authority simply exists, and everything else adjusts around it. I did not kneel because I was told to. I lowered myself because it felt natural, like gravity reclaiming its role. Pride did not need to be stripped away. It simply lost relevance. He looked at me, and in that gaze there was no urgency, no anger at the state of the world, no panic about time running out. The calm itself was a message. It said that chaos is never the final word, and that history is not as uncontrolled as men often believe. Only after that stillness had fully settled did he speak. And what he asked was not heavy. It was simple, almost disarmingly so. When he spoke, his words did not press down on me. They did not arrive with urgency or command. They came with clarity, like water poured into an empty cup. He did not ask me to change constitutions. He did not ask me to declare a new religion. He did not ask me to punish or reward anyone. He asked me to begin every meeting that shapes the life of the nation with the sign of the cross. I remember my first reaction clearly. It was not resistance, it was surprise. In a world fractured by violence, poverty, manipulation, and power struggles, I expected something complex. A plan, a warning, a demand for action that would shake institutions. Instead, he pointed to a gesture so small that it almost felt insignificant. Yet in that moment, I understood that the simplicity was the point. The sign of the cross was not presented as a religious performance meant to separate believers from non-believers. It was presented as an act of remembrance. A reminder placed at the very beginning of decision-making, before words harden into positions, before egos claim the room. To make that sign is to acknowledge limitation. It says, without speaking, that human intelligence is not absolute, that power does not originate in the chair one sits on, that no leader, no matter how strong, sees the full picture alone. The gesture places every decision beneath something higher than strategy. In leadership, especially during crisis, the temptation is always the same: to believe that speed is more important than correctness, that winning is more important than truth. That authority means exemption from accountability. The sign of the cross interrupts that illusion. It slows the room by a few seconds. And in leadership, seconds matter. Those seconds create space. Space for conscience to speak. Space for arrogance to soften. Space for responsibility to re-enter the conversation. I was shown that the gesture was not about forcing belief onto others. It was about placing myself first, under judgment before judging others. It was about remembering that leadership is borrowed, not owned. Power, when unexamined, becomes dangerous. Power, when submitted to a higher moral reference, becomes service. That was the request. Nothing more, nothing less. And I was left with a choice. When I returned fully to myself, when the quiet light had withdrawn and my body rested once again in the ordinary world, the request stayed with me. It did not echo as a command, it lingered as a question. What happens when a leader chooses humility before control? I did not announce anything. I did not make a speech. I did not explain my experience to the nation or to my cabinet. I simply began. At the first meeting that followed, before documents were opened, before voices rose, before positions were taken, I made the sign of the cross. I did it calmly, without drama. I did not ask anyone else to follow. I did not wait for approval. Something subtle shifted. Inside me, first. Leadership often trains the mind to remain tense, always alert, always ready to defend a position, always prepared to dominate the room. That gesture dismantled that posture within me. Not by weakening my resolve, but by reorienting it. I entered the meeting not as a man who needed to win, but as a man who needed to serve. That difference is not philosophical. It is practical. The first change was humility, not the humility that performs weakness, but the humility that recognizes dependence. I spoke less at the beginning. I listened more. I noticed the emotional undercurrents in the room that I would normally override in the name of efficiency. The second change was focus. Ambition scatters the mind. Fear accelerates it. That simple act slowed my internal rhythm. Decisions no longer felt like reactions. They felt like responses. The third change was moral clarity. Every decision we face can be measured in many ways: economic impact, political cost, public perception, strategic advantage. But one question often remains unasked: is this right? The gesture did not answer that question for me. It forced me to ask it. And when a leader asks that question honestly, it changes the direction of power. It becomes harder to justify cruelty as necessity, harder to excuse corruption as pragmatism, harder to sacrifice the invisible for the visible. I realized that authority does not erode when it bows, it sharpens. I did not become less decisive, I became more precise. I did not lose control of the room, I gained control of myself. This was not magic, it was alignment. And alignment changes everything. Life did not transform overnight. There were no headlines, no sudden peace, no dramatic reversal of fortune. People still arrived at work with their habits, their fears, their ambitions. Conflicts did not disappear. Problems did not solve themselves. And yet, something repeated itself often enough that it could not be ignored. Meetings that began with that quiet gesture unfolded differently. Not perfectly, but differently. The tone softened before it sharpened. Voices still disagreed, but they no longer rushed to dominate. People listened long enough to actually hear one another. Interruptions became fewer. Silences became meaningful instead of uncomfortable. Decisions, once made, carried more weight. Not because they were imposed with force, but because they were understood. People left the room knowing what had been agreed, and more importantly, why. Implementation improved. This was the most unexpected result. In leadership, failure rarely comes from lack of decision. It comes from decisions that exist only on paper. Plans that dissolve the moment resistance appears. Agreements that everyone applauds in the room and quietly ignores afterward. That pattern weakened. When a meeting began with an acknowledgement of moral accountability, words gained gravity. Commitments felt less flexible. Excuses felt thinner. I noticed something else. Egos retreated slightly, not because anyone was shamed, but because the atmosphere did not reward performance. The room did not feel like a stage. It felt like a place of responsibility. That alone changes behavior. No one announced this shift. No one analyzed it aloud. It simply became noticeable through repetition. Success did not come from supernatural intervention. It came from collective mental alignment. When people remember that they are accountable to something beyond immediate advantage, cooperation increases, trust stabilizes, execution follows. This is how real change happens. Quietly, incrementally, without spectacle. The world often waits for miracles and overlooks discipline. It searches for power and ignores posture. But posture shapes power. Nothing about our circumstances became easier, but our ability to face them improved. And that made all the difference. As these patterns repeated, I began to understand that this experience was not meant for me alone. It was a lesson written in quiet language, meant to be read by anyone who carries responsibility over others. Nations do not collapse because they lack power. They collapse because power loses its moral anchor. History does not suffer from a shortage of strong leaders. It suffers from a shortage of grounded ones. Men and women who can command armies, control budgets, influence millions, yet forget to ask themselves what they are serving. The gesture I was shown did not create morality. It revealed it. It forced the question that every leader eventually tries to avoid: who stands above me? When that question disappears, leadership becomes dangerous. Not immediately, not obviously, but gradually. Decisions become easier to justify. Harm becomes easier to explain away. People become numbers. Consequences become abstractions. A leader who never bows will eventually demand that everyone else does. Strength without humility does not protect a nation. It exhausts it. What I learned is this: a strong leader is not the one who is always right. A strong leader is the one who remains accountable even when no one can challenge him. Especially then, accountability to law is important. Accountability to institutions is necessary, but accountability to conscience is irreplaceable. Laws can be rewritten. Institutions can be captured. Conscience, when truly awakened, cannot be bribed. The world teaches leaders to appear confident at all costs, to never hesitate, to never admit uncertainty. Yet uncertainty, when acknowledged honestly, becomes wisdom. The gesture reminded me that leadership is not about standing above others, but about standing between two obligations. One upward, toward truth, one outward, toward people. When that balance is lost, power tilts, and when power tilts too far, it falls. This lesson is not Christian only. It is not Islamic only. It belongs to anyone who understands that authority without restraint becomes destruction. Every leader, whether of a nation, a community, a family, or even a conscience, must answer the same question. Before you decide for others, before you command, before you sign, before you speak, what do you bow to? The sign of the cross is simple in form, yet vast in meaning. Its power does not come from complexity, but from what it represents when taken seriously. It is the meeting point of two lines, one vertical, one horizontal. The vertical line points upward. It speaks of responsibility beyond the visible world, responsibility before truth, before conscience, before God, before whatever name one gives to moral reality. It reminds the leader that every action echoes beyond the present moment. The horizontal line stretches outward. It represents responsibility toward people, toward families, communities, nations, toward the living reality of human lives that bear the consequences of every decision made in closed rooms. A leader stands at the intersection of these two lines. When leadership focuses only upward, it becomes detached. When it focuses only outward, it becomes populist or reckless. When it ignores both, it becomes tyrannical. The cross marks the place where power becomes service. This is why the gesture matters. It places the leader physically and mentally at that intersection. It is not decoration. It is orientation. In that brief movement, the leader acknowledges that decisions are not private possessions. They are entrusted responsibilities, borrowed authority that must one day be answered for. I began to see that the cross is not a symbol of domination, as it is sometimes misunderstood. It is a symbol of limitation, of sacrifice, of bearing responsibility rather than escaping it. In a world obsessed with expansion, limitation is uncomfortable, yet without limits, nothing holds shape. Every civilization that has endured understood this principle. They placed restraints on power not because leaders were weak, but because leaders were human. The sign does not solve problems. It aligns the one who must face them, and alignment precedes effectiveness. This understanding changed how I viewed faith itself, not as an escape from reality, but as a discipline that anchors reality, not as a badge of identity, but as a compass of action. Symbols matter when they are lived. When they are emptied of meaning, they become decorations. When they are inhabited, they become forces. The cross, in that moment before decision, became a reminder not of belief alone, but of responsibility carried to its full depth. It is natural to ask how something so small can influence outcomes that are so large. We live in an age that trusts scale, speed, and force. We believe that change must announce itself loudly to be real, yet the most durable transformations rarely begin that way. They begin with rhythm. A repeated gesture, performed consistently, reshapes behavior over time, not through fear, but through expectation. When a meeting always begins the same way, the mind prepares itself differently. People enter the room already slowed, already aware that this space is not casual. The gesture creates a pause. That pause interrupts impulse. It breaks the automatic patterns that dominate modern decision-making. Without pause, meetings become competitions. With pause, they become deliberations. Culture is not created by speeches. It is created by what is done repeatedly without explanation. By beginning every meeting with the same act, a silent message was sent. This space is not about winning, it is about choosing correctly. This space is not owned by ego, it is governed by responsibility. Over time, people adjust themselves to that message. Tone follows posture, language follows tone, decisions follow language. The gesture also equalizes the room. In those few seconds, hierarchy softens. Rank still exists, but it no longer defines worth. Everyone present is reminded that no one stands above accountability. This produces a subtle honesty that no policy can mandate. Trust grows not because people agree, but because they believe the process itself is anchored. That is why small gestures matter more than grand declarations. Declarations excite, gestures shape. When repeated daily, a gesture becomes a boundary. It marks where behavior must change. Inside that boundary, different rules apply. The world often underestimates this power because it cannot be measured easily. There is no chart for humility, no metric for conscience. Yet these are the forces that determine whether systems function or fracture. Large change does not require constant pressure, it requires consistent alignment. That alignment begins with the smallest movements, performed faithfully, even when no one is watching. As time passed, I understood that the story I was living carried a question larger than any single nation or belief. It was a question that follows every person who holds influence, whether they admit it or not. Before you decide for others, what do you bow to? Not what do you say you respect, not what your speeches praise, but what you actually submit to when no one is watching. Every leader answers this question daily, even if unconsciously. Some bow to polls, some bow to markets, some bow to fear, some bow to pride, some bow to survival at any cost. Very few pause long enough to examine their answer. The danger is not choosing the wrong answer once. The danger is never asking the question at all. When that happens, power begins to drift. Decisions detach from meaning. Authority becomes self-referential. I was not shown the sign of the cross as a demand for religious conformity. I was shown it as a mirror that forces the leader to see himself in relation to something greater. For Muslims, the question already exists in prayer. For Christians, it exists in conscience. For those who claim no faith, it exists in moral responsibility. The form changes, the essence does not. What matters is not the symbol itself, but whether the leader acknowledges a boundary he did not create. A leader who bows before truth will never be perfect, but he will be restrained. He will hesitate before harming. He will feel weight where others feel freedom. And that weight protects people. The world has seen enough leaders who bow only to themselves. Their nations pay the price long after their names fade. I share this not as instruction but as testimony. What you do with it is your choice. But the question remains, waiting patiently just beneath every decision. Before you speak for millions, before you decide their future, before you sign their fate, what do you bow to? I have spoken to you as a man who carries a title, but also as a man who carries doubt, fatigue, and responsibility. I did not choose the hour in which I was born, nor the weight placed on my shoulders. I only chose how to stand under it. The world today is tired. Nations are tired. Faith communities are tired. People are tired of noise, tired of division, tired of leaders who speak loudly but listen little. We live in an age that celebrates certainty and punishes reflection. Yet reflection is where wisdom begins. I do not ask the world to adopt my experience as doctrine. I do not ask Muslims to become Christians, or Christians to become something else. I do not ask leaders to copy a gesture without understanding its meaning. I ask something simpler and far more difficult. I ask each person who holds power, visible or invisible, to pause. Pause before the meeting. Pause before the order. Pause before the signature. Pause before the word that cannot be taken back. In that pause, remember that power is not proof of correctness. Influence is not evidence of truth. Authority is not permission to forget conscience. Africa has suffered not because it lacks intelligence, but because it has been ruled too often without moral grounding. The same is true for many places in the world. The soil changes, the pattern does not. I have learned that faith, when genuine, does not pull us away from responsibility. It pushes us deeper into it. It does not remove complexity. It strengthens us to carry it without becoming cruel. I wish peace for the Sahel, not the peace of silence, but the peace of justice. I wish strength for Africa, not the strength of domination, but the strength of dignity. I wish clarity for the world, not the clarity of simple answers, but the clarity of honest questions. To those who feel lost, I say this: exhaustion is not failure. Sometimes it is the doorway through which truth enters. To those who feel angry, remember that anger is often pain asking to be heard. To those who feel powerful, remember that power fades faster than consequences. If this story stirred something in you, sit with it. You do not need to agree with me. You only need to be honest with yourself. Ask the question that waits beneath all others. Before you decide for others, what do you bow to? If you found value here, stay with this conversation. Not with me as a person, but with the ideas that challenge us to lead better, live cleaner, and choose more carefully. Share your thoughts with others, speak respectfully, listen deeply. These small acts shape culture more than force ever could. I believe the world can still turn toward what is good, not all at once, not dramatically, but steadily, through choices made with humility. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso. What I have spoken here is true to my experience, and I stand by it. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso. These words are not crafted to impress, but to bear witness. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso. I affirm, with a clear conscience, that what I have shared is the truth as I lived it. May peace find those who seek it honestly. May leaders remember why they were entrusted with power. May we all, in our own way, turn away from what corrupts us and walk back toward what restores us. If this message resonates, remain part of the dialogue. Return when you are ready. The conversation continues wherever conscience is still alive.